20,000 criminal homicides each year, who decides if your loved one is deemed newsworthy? Survived in death by family, the fight for justice never ends until all those involved are placed behind bars. Join me as we shed lights on the atrocities of mankind. Welcome to Crimes Among Us.
This is the story of Teia Beverly and the mystery that surrounds the suspicious death of Jariah. With the upcoming retrial approaching May 2nd, who do you stand with when the justice truly is for Jariah? July 2016, as Teia would describe it, she married the man of her dreams, Morris Beverly. As Teia opens her mouth to say I do, she has no idea of the news that could potentially change her marriage forever. After getting married, they moved to Morris's hometown of Port Gibson, a small town where everyone knows everyone with approximately 1,200 citizens. While in Port Gibson, Teia worked as an overnight LPN at a nursing home. She would later work at a local school as the school nurse. One day, Teia receives a text message that any newly married woman would only hope is a prank. Allegedly, Morris had fathered a child right before their marriage. After swallowing this huge pill, Teia confronts Morris about it, and he confirms it to be true. Teia is, of course, devastated. She is pregnant, and now her husband may have another child. Allegedly, Jariah Smith and Morris had been in a party over at his cousin's house when they hooked up. Jariah was single, and there are reports that Morris told her he was single also. A few months later, she told him that she's pregnant and the baby may be his. A DNA test would confirm this. The date is October the 22nd, 2017. Teia alleges early in the morning around 5 a.m., Morris woke her up and said that he's thirsty and he wants her to get him something to drink. On the way to get his drink, she stops to check on Jariah. Teia says Jariah was a wild sleeper. She noticed her kind of over in the corner. She goes to adjust her. When she touches her skin, it's cold. She immediately knew something was wrong and she calls out to Morris. When Morris gets in the room and he touches Jariah, she's stiff. Teia, with her nurse background, said there was no reason to do CPR. There were no signs of life. Morris calls 911. He was in such a frantic mode that Teia takes the phone. After talking to 911, she calls Jariah, Jariah's biological mother. Jariah gets there before 911 does. Teia says there was no swelling, no blood, nothing. 8 days later, the Mississippi medical examiner determines repeated blunt force trauma to be the cause of death. This case was ruled a homicide. Was her death due to negligence? Or were there more sinister hands in play as repeated blunt force trauma took the life of baby Jariah? With the upcoming retrial of Teia Beverly coming May 2nd, who do you stand with when justice truly is for baby Jariah? Jariah, when interviewed by investigators, alleges that Jariah had come home twice with questionable injuries. First, a black eye. When Jariah questioned the Beverlys, they told her they're not sure what she had laid in. The second time, merely 6 days later, her nose and forehead were scarred. Deandra tells investigators that Morris had told her it's only a little bruise. Jariah sees the bruises in person and she snaps. She says, "You're going to have DHS called on me." Not long after this discussion, DHS was called. They investigated both homes, and on the second time, they only investigated Jariah's. The call from an unknown party alleges that the Beverlys had been beating on Jariah. However, DHS would investigate and they would find no signs of neglect or child abuse. The case was closed. This is the recollection of Jariah on the days leading up to the death of Jariah. Jariah states that the Beverlys got Jariah on Saturday. Before that, Jariah had met with Danielle Skinner, Morris's cousin, at a Chick-fil-A. While they waited, Jariah seemed happy as her and her mom ate Chick-fil-A fries together. After watching Jariah, Danielle decides to let her mother watch Jariah also. The Beverlys would finally get their hands on Jariah Saturday. Investigators would repeatedly ask everyone during their interviews, was Jariah acting normal? A tactic used to perhaps place together the timeline of when the injuries occurred. There have been reports that with a trauma so extreme, no one could act normal. Teia would be first up for trial. Trial lasted 5 days in Claiborne County. Jurors returned with a verdict. Teia Beverly, for the 2017 death of baby Jariah, the court finds you guilty. A devoted mother, wife, daughter, sister, aunt, nurse, and much more. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But then, the unthinkable happens. A clerical error sets Teia free. Teia Beverly's great American dream put to rest by one man's need to fulfill his own selfish desires. All the smoke and mirrors finally subside. Who will pay for the death of Jariah? Hattiesburg Patriot News releases official court transcripts that may give us some indication of what happened that night. Dr. Nichols' courtroom interview, forensic pathologist. Well, first of all, you can't tell it all just by looking at a bruise how long it's been there, and the best we can do is use a histology to give us some idea about how long it's been there, and the body has a healing process that occurs in a predictable fashion, including in this case the red blood cells. Once they get out of the blood vessels where they are, they will tend to break apart, and there's no evidence here that the red blood cells had broken apart. After that, it becomes a series of white blood cells that come in predictably to remove the injured tissue and to remove the bleeding where the bleeding should not be. And finally, there will be cells that come in to make scar particles. These are called fibroblasts that will aid in the scars in the areas of the body where damage has occurred. Are these the hemorrhaging that you're talking about? Yes. And let me get that term again, describing that kind of hemorrhage so the court reporter can get that. He further explains, well, this is a fresh, acute, new hemorrhage. And is that what you referred to as a subarachnoid hemorrhage? Dr. Nichols explains, I refer to this as a scapular hemorrhage because that's where the bleeding is. So this is a new event, and this is bleeding in the scalp, and it's brand new blood. It's clear. With a microscope, both the skull fracture and the epidural hematoma are in the healing process, so they happen before the cluster of bruising to the scalp that we're seeing now. Based on your experience and knowledge, a person, this child receiving this blow, what if any effect would that have had on that child receiving that blow that you're looking at there on S-16? Well, obviously, the child could have been made unconscious. The child may have very well had a concussion. We noticed that this child was neurologically normal hours before she was to be found dead. She was walking, moving around, being held by people, not crying and moving. She was neurologically not impaired by that injury hours before her death. Morris Beverly has somehow managed to stay out of the limelight. Have we forgotten that he is also a suspect? When all of the smoke and mirrors subside, who do you stand with? Justice for Jariah. The retrial began Monday in Monroe County, Mississippi. January 2021, Teia Beverly found guilty of killing her own stepdaughter, Jariah Smith. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Months later, September 2021, a judge would overturn the conviction due to jury misconduct. Court records would show that the victim, Jariah's great-uncle, was one of the jurors. He did not disclose this information during questioning. Day one of trial consisted of jury selection lasting over 9 hours and selecting 12 jurors. Jariah's father, Morris, who was also charged with capital murder, was supposed to stand trial in 2021. However, he has still not gone to trial, and there is no word on why that is. Day 2 of trial, District Attorney Daniela Shorter argues that Teia wanted the perfect life and perfect marriage. And with Morris fathering Jariah, that got in the way. The defense is saying that they wanted to take care of Jariah, and Teia supported Morris. The defense is saying that Jariah just so happened to die in the Beverly's care, and that Jariah was with at least 10 other people before the Beverlys picked her up. Tempers flared in the courtroom. The judge had to tell Dennis Sweet, Teia's attorney, to control his team. I, Stanwood Kia, had dozens of supporters inside the courtroom, as well as Deidreana's supporters. Deidreana Smith, Jariah's biological mother, was in court Tuesday. Day 3 of the trial was even more chaotic. Testimony had to be paused due to pool issues with the camera inside the courtroom. Investigators would later search the courtroom for any audio or listening devices. On day 3, Teia's lawyer would also ask for a mistrial. Denied. 2 videos were watched of Teia being questioned, one when she was a suspect and the other when she was not. Some discrepancies would come to the light as Teia described 2 different outfits that Jariah wore on that night. Prosecutors say they still have up to 12 more witnesses that they plan on calling to the stand. Day 4, Jariah, Jariah's mother, takes the stand. She points out her 14-month-old received injuries while in the care of the Beverlys. A black eye and scrapes and scratches on her face. Jariah stated they told her the injuries occurred while she was learning to walk. However, Jariah said she had no issues with walking. She walked just fine. Prosecutors show a video of Jariah walking around with family members in a Vicksburg hospital. What was that grandma used to say? Okay. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. When all the half-truths and full lies subside, whose side will you stand on when justice truly is? For baby Jariah. Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky day in Western superstition. Prosecutors spent their last 7 days calling witnesses to the stand, and on Wednesday it was the defense's turn, led by attorney Dennis Sweet, a self-proclaimed high-dollar, successful lawyer with a 95% win record when trying personal injury, product liability, and punitive damages in the millions. How sweet it is to be able to afford Mr. Sweet. Standing 6'5", when Sweet walks into a room, he has everyone's attention. Some would describe it as he has the world in his hands. They called 2 witnesses to testify, both medical experts in their own right. They both state that they don't believe Jariah's death was caused by multiple blunt force trauma. They don't believe it was a homicide. They testified the pictures don't show trauma. They spoke on the video of Jariah and said there was no way they could tell by the video if Jariah was hurt or not. Teia Beverly stands before Judge Irving. The jury finds you not guilty. Teia describes herself as being in shock. She jokes, as soon as we are cleared, we are moving out of that part of Mississippi. However, Morris is still charged with capital murder. A date has not yet been set. The $1 Million Man, Dennis Sweet, raised a shadow of doubt. And that is just something you can't have when sentencing someone for homicide. Today, you will get no justice, but I have a feeling this isn't over.
On average, 40% of murders in the U.S. go unsolved. Once a case becomes cold, it is treated as a non-priority. The families that are left without justice need answers. Their cases deserve your undivided attention. Tune in next time and help me ensure what's done in the dark will always come to the light.